My name is Judy Flattery, and I lead the team who put together today's program of speakers. We'll now begin session 1, which we're calling Doing the Work to be Suitable for Parole. In this session, we'll learn about some actions being taken within prisons, both by and for incarcerated individuals who are ready to take their life in a new direction. Our first speaker is Michael Todd from the Compassion Prison Project. Michael Todd is the manager of Rehabilitative and Reentry Programming at Compassion Prison Project. Michael and I were together this week for 4 days at Calipatria State Prison in California near the Mexican border. And we want to extend a very special warm welcome to family members of the wonderful men we met there who are with us today. Compassion Prison Project deals with recognizing and learning to deal with the impact of childhood trauma. Michael Todd has shared that he has survived many of these adverse childhood experiences, call them ACEs. He has survived a traumatic brain injury, which he suffered in an automobile accident that killed the other people he was with. Most importantly, he has survived a life sentence in the California Department of Corrections back in the days before they offered much in the way of rehabilitative programming. Michael was tried as an adult for a crime he committed when he was just 15 years old. He served over 27 years on this sentence before he was granted parole. While in prison, Michael participated in many self-help and rehabilitative programs. Since being released, Michael has continued to work to make a difference in the way that people view people in prison and view those who are released from prison. He facilitates classes teaching people about the types of trauma that can lead to crime and that come from crime and how to heal from it. At some point during one of these Compassion Prison Project events that we have at prisons, we're asked to introduce ourselves to the prison residents who are attending the program. When Michael introduces himself, the attendees lean forward to catch every word he says. He has their respect. Michael didn't leave prison and forget about those he left behind. He returns again and again, sharing hope and practical wisdom about what it will take to confront and address the issues of the past, to demonstrate authentic rehabilitation to key decision makers once they're out, and to create that new future. We will have a short Q&A following Michael's talk. Please put your questions in the chat. Welcome, Michael Todd from Compassion Prison Project.
Thank you, Judy. As Judy said, my name is Michael Todd. I'm the manager of reentry and rehabilitation for the Compassion Prison Project. I am formerly incarcerated. I was arrested at 15, tried as an adult, and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. On that 25 years, I served 27 years. And the reason for that is because I went in there with the idea that I had no hope. They told me I was going to prison to die. So I went to prison to die, and I did everything I could to stay there and die in there. But how did I get there? That's the question everybody wants to know. Whether it's your family, yourself, the families of your victim, they all want to know why. Why did this happen? How did you become this person? So, as way of introduction, I can tell you that my very first memory was when I was 3 years old and was watching my dad try to kill my mom with a hammer. And she had to lock herself in a car to get away from him. And I could do nothing. And when I was 9 years old, I watched my dad try to shoot some people because they brought someone to his party that he didn't like. Violence very quickly became the solution to everything. I didn't know how to fit in, so I decided to fit out. You know, my parents divorced shortly after, or they separated shortly after I was 3, and I was sent to live with my grandmother. And as much as she loved me and protected me and wanted to take care of me, I had an uncle in the house who sexually abused me. So all I could do for the rest of my life as a young boy and teenager is try to prove my manhood, try to prove that I was somebody, try to gain acceptance because nobody in my house really loved me. I was an object. So I had to develop some survival mechanisms and belief systems which were flawed. I had to believe that everybody else was an object. Everybody was there. I could harm them because they could harm me. I had to protect myself above everything else. And that led to me fighting in school. By the time I was 12 years old, I was involved in a gang. By the time I was 13 years old, I was involved in a larger gang. And by the time I was 15 years old, I had killed somebody and been arrested. So a month and a half after my 17th birthday, I am on a maximum security prison with guys getting out of the shoe. People who had killed people, people who were never getting out of prison. And I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to protect myself. So I did everything I could to be somebody. But with that said, I got to prison and I wanted to program. I got there and I told my counselor, and this is before you even get to go to the yard, you have to see your counselor. And he says, "So what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I have a couple credits left. I want to get a high school diploma." And he said, "Yeah, we don't do that." Okay. I said, "All right, well, I want to get a college degree." He said, "Well, if you can afford to pay for it yourself and do it through correspondence, you can do that." I'm like, "Well, I'm a broke kid that just got to prison. I don't have any money." So he said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, I want to get a vocation." He said, "Well, you're too high custody to get a vocation." So I said, "What can I do then? I can't get an education. I can't get a vocation. What can I do?" He said, "Here's your options. You can work as a porter, which is like a janitor in the building. You can work in the kitchen. You can work on the yard crew, or you can make a knife and go to the hole." This is one of the options that my counselor gave me. And over my time in prison, I did all of those. But I walked into this situation knowing that there was no hope. There was no hope of going home. There was no hope of improving myself. There was no hope of anything unless I did it myself. And it took me a long time to decide that I wanted to do it myself. I was involved in gangs. I was the guy that they had labeled a shot caller. I started wars. I resisted the authority as much as possible because all I could do is look at me versus them. And anytime you choose to label someone else as something different, you dehumanize them, you dehumanize yourself, and then you're able to do whatever you want to them and accept whatever they do to you because they're the enemy. Everybody is the enemy when you're in this mindset. I like to say that prison is collective insanity because everything that you do in there makes sense when you're in the middle of it. And as soon as you step away from it, you're like, what the hell was I thinking? How did that make sense? Why did I have to go after that guy? Because he bumped into me and didn't say, excuse me. In prison, you can't let that go. Your image means everything. So if somebody doesn't say, excuse me, then now you're the guy that everybody's going to keep disrespecting. And it takes a long time to get past that need for acceptance and recognition. That's what led me to prison to begin with. That's what led me to gangs. I didn't know how to be myself. I was scared to let anybody see me. So, having done this and went through all of these different experiences, it took me, a good 15, 20 years before I really started thinking outside of just immediate, let's live here. You know, because I'm like, this is it. This is all I have. Nothing is going to change. They're not providing me programming. They're not doing anything. Later on, they brought NA and AA back into the prisons, but most people went there only because they were sentenced to uh, that class because they got a dirty drug test or caught with drugs or whatever. So no one wanted to be there to improve. And probably about 2014, there was a shift towards rehabilitation in prison. People started their own classes. It wasn't provided by CDCR. It was provided by the other guys on the yard who said, hey, let's start working on these things. Let's start talking about how we got to prison. Let's start preparing to go home. And this is at a time when we really weren't allowed to think that we could go home. They said if you had life, life was life. You were not going home. And as I got into uh, a computer class, as I started taking Toastmasters, as I started taking lifer groups, the guys that I had been on the yard with were saying, hey, you should drop out of those classes. Come back here out here onto the yard. Carry a knife. Just in case something happens. And I kept looking at them and I was like, why do these guys keep trying to keep me in prison? You know, I'm like, I want to go home. I want to learn how to use computer because that's what the world is. And all these guys that I saw as my enemies are now in these self-help groups. And they're saying, hey, why don't you learn about your triggers? Why don't you learn about your causative factors? Why don't you learn about what sent you to prison to begin with? So there was a paradigm shift in me because I'd been living a life of hating others and fear of letting them know who I was. And these guys now want to help me get out of prison. With that change, I also started working in the program office at the prison I was at, and I started looking at the COs who had always been the enemy also as coworkers. We got out of this cops and cons mentality, and we actually cared about whether the other one got in trouble. So now my resistance to authority had now been these guys are my friends. They care about me. So I was able to just shake off everything that they had put in my mind for all those years, that everybody's the enemy. You're on your own. Your gang's your only people that you have. Fortunately, I got transferred to Lancaster, a facility there, and I got into a dog program. I learned how to train service dogs. I started taking more programming. And before I got there, I went to the parole board and they said, you know, it looks like you're starting to program, and we think that you're going to be found suitable for parole. It won't be today, but one of these days, you know, we believe you'll be found suitable. And I thought I was going to get a 15-year denial. So a 5-year denial was a victory to me. And I said, wow, they just gave me hope, something I have not had for over 20 years. And I started working and doing the work and internalizing these things and preparing. And while I was in Lancaster, Fritzy Hortzman and the Compassion Prison Project came in and they did one of the compassion trauma circles, which has become Step Inside the Circle. And they started talking about childhood trauma and how we got there and what happened to us and what made us the people that we were that could commit these types of crimes. And nobody was talking about that at that time. It's become pretty common with the self-help groups now, but nobody was talking about it then. And it made a huge difference. I mean, when you look at our 16-week curriculum, when you get to the eighth week, they're talking about violence, the roots of violence, how you became this type of person. And if I would have known that stuff when I was a child, maybe I wouldn't have went to prison. If I would have learned about it as soon as I got to prison, maybe I wouldn't have continued along that lifestyle. Maybe I wouldn't have continued hurting people and allowing myself to be hurt because I didn't know how to be myself. My whole identity was wrapped up in an image. And through these classes, you start looking at, you know, they have victim impact. You get to see people who were harmed by crime. They come in and they tell us, like, this is what happened to me. This is how I feel. And then you become ashamed of the person you were. All the pride you had in your gang and the lifestyle you were living, that all goes away because now you're like, you get to see other humans that you've harmed. Even if you didn't harm that specific person, your lifestyle harmed so many people. So I was able to look at that, look at myself, look at the community and say, I want to be a part of society. I don't want to be an outcast. I don't want to stay on the outside. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to be hurt anymore. So how do we cure this? And this is what we've learned is that we have to love one another. We have to put aside those differences that we've created that we've made so important in our lives that really don't matter. All that matters is that everybody can grow up happy, healthy, safe, and it's incumbent on us in this generation to stop the cycle of trauma and these adverse childhood experiences that the children go through. And that's what the work of the Compassion Prison Project is aimed to do. Because Fritzy always goes into prisons and she says, I come in here to teach you guys this so you can be the messengers to the world. People outside don't have time. They're on their phones. They're doing all this stuff. They're not doing this work. You guys have had the time to do this work. You've done the work and you can come home and teach us. You can show us how to change the world. And for me, that is my highest obligation and that I have no choice. I have to come out and do this. I caused so much harm as a child. I caused harm while I was in prison. And every guy that I know in prison, it doesn't matter if they're the toughest gangbanger, when you go and you talk to them on their own and say, what would you change if you could? Every single one of them says, I would go out there, I would work with the youth, and I would teach them not to do the things that I did. I don't want them to have the life that I had. Doesn't matter if they're still in the gang. They don't want the kids to be in the gangs. So this is why we do the work. I encourage you, follow Compassion Prison Project, watch Step Inside the Circle, follow us on social media. We have a community meeting every week. Please come to community meeting and meet other people who are like-minded. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Michael Todd. That was very inspiring, encouraging, and motivating. This is an awesome time. I'm so blessed to be here amongst everyone. My name is Aku Musa. I'm a part of the planning team for the President's Partnership, the Education and Action Conference today. And I'm going to be coordinating the question time right now. I was incarcerated in Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 23 months. And while I was in, I lost my son, and that was a very traumatic experience. And that sent me into a depression. And then I felt it was, after a year, I felt it was time to get to work. And I started a program while I was incarcerated called Better Dads. And that program is still going to this day. So I'm excited and tremendously humbled to be here today. So at this time, we're gonna have some question and answer. So let's have some questions right now so that I can present those to Mr. Michael Todd. Let me see in the chat here who we have. Okay, so we have a question, Mr. Sheldon. Is there a charge to have Compassion Prison Project come into a facility? Are you muted, Mr. Todd? Okay, there you go.
There you go. I was trying to send you a message. I was muted. There is not a charge. We are, especially if it's in California, we have grants from CDCR that allow us to do the work in there. We are in 20 of the 32 prisons in California. We're getting ready to go into a couple more. We are in 9 different states in the US. We are in Colombia, we are in Northern Ireland, we are in New Zealand.
Awesome, awesome. Let's get another question. Do you go into Soledad prison?
Yes, we go into CTF all the time. We recently did a documentary on the veterans in prison in CTF.
Awesome. What about New York?
We don't currently go into New York. It's a matter of funding and invitations, but if we get invitations and or funding, we will go in there.
Okay. What about Old Folsom Prison?
Yes, we have been in Old Folsom. We actually did our workshop in the same chow hall that Johnny Cash gave his concert in. And we are setting up our Trauma Talks 16-week curriculum there. We're just waiting to get a room and a sponsor to do it.
Awesome, awesome. Someone asked about Louisiana and Ohio.
Same thing. We are looking for funding and we're looking for invitations. Fritzy has been all over the country. If someone says, hey, you can come in, she'll go over there. We've also worked with the officers in Washington and New Zealand. We recently did a training with the officers in Chowchilla, knowing that they've had a lot of issues recently. We do have some volunteers in the different states and different countries. So if you come to our community meetings, sometimes you can coordinate with them and they can get you information to get into certain institutions.
All right, wonderful. And what are your funding sources to keep your program going? And are you in Georgia?
So our funding, we have grants and we have donors. We recently got a grant from the Leo Clinic at Notre Dame. They're doing a study on the effectiveness of our program in California. But most of it comes either through the Wright grant in California, which is spread out between different community-based organizations that work with people in prison. And also, we do have a contract with CDCR to provide programming. So they give us a grant for that.
Okay. And how much are you working with other places such as Scandinavia to learn about what they're doing?
Fritzy is in contact with a lot of different people and organizations. I work with reentry and restorative justice organizations as well. I work with Mass Liberation, which provides transitional housing. So we are in contact with a bunch of different places. And if you've seen Fritzy's podcast, Compassion in Action, has spoken to Gabor Mate and so many of the professionals that really focus on this. So she's getting all she's getting the scoop from all the top people. So
Yes, yes, sir. What about how to start a chapter in Wyoming? Someone's saying they don't really have much there.
okay. So we do a lot of volunteer work. We have a letter writing campaign. So if you want to get paired with somebody in prison so you can write letters to them. You would reach out to Jill Lord. Is it Jill.Lord? Jill.Lord at compassionprisonproject.org. She's our volunteer coordinator, and she can tell you about the different things that we do. She can pair you with a letter writer, and again, come to the community meetings and we can discuss more.
Okay, great. Are you in Mississippi?
I think there's been something there, but it's all through volunteers. There's no official chapters anywhere outside of California.
Okay. And when you're raising funds, like what are the funds actually paying for?
So it depends on what it is, because we're typically getting grants for specific things, which is going in and doing trauma work in prisons. Um, but we have also done a hygiene drive and we sent hygiene into indigent inmates in San Quentin and Chowchilla. We're trying to expand that. We have done a book which was written by prisoners in uh, Fort Dix who are we spent 3 years designing it, putting it together, putting their art and their poetry and everything in there. That's about to be released. So some of the money will go to that. Most of it goes into our workshops and creating workbooks. I am like a one man shipping crew. So I send out thousands and thousands of workbooks. Our Trauma Talks course curriculum is 16 weeks, but it's 2 chapters in each workbook. So we have 8 workbooks that they go through. There's 16 DVDs that go along with it. They watch the DVD, they sit in circle, they talk about it, they work on it in the workbook. But what ends up happening is they create this bond between guys of different nationalities, different race, different former gang ties, and they start caring for each other and supporting each other. And one of the biggest things that we always want people to do is stop asking what's wrong with that guy and ask what happened to that guy. And when you can shift that and say, wow, maybe he's just going through something, then the hostility ends.
Man, thank you so much, Michael Todd. I'm excited to find more information about the Compassion Prison Project .org and getting involved. I'm from Cali, born and raised, so I'm excited. My dad did some time in Tehachapi Prison.
We were just there too, so great.
So thank you so much. It's
Thank you.
I'm really a high level respect, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.